Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Taylor is next, and I've allotted him 45 minutes.
Mitchell Taylor for the participant Government of Canada, and with me is Hugh McCauley. Mr. Commissioner, as well as Mr. Lunn, at tab 678 of Canada's book, there are 3 documents to do with preparation of speeches for parliamentarians. Mr. Wallace is agreeable, and I have asked others, and no one has objected to simply putting those documents in without the need for anyone to speak to them, any witness to speak to them. So I propose then that we do just that. The first tab is number 6. Getting used to Mr. Lunn putting things right to left. Preparation for speeches is the name of the document at tab 6, and I ask that that be the next exhibit.
Exhibit 629.
The document at tab 7 is labeled Speech Writing at DFO, and I ask that that be the next exhibit.
630.
The document at tab 8 is entitled Compendium of Procedure, House of Commons, Canada, which I ask to be the next exhibit.
631.
Those documents, Mr. Commissioner, which we will of course deal with later in more detail when it comes to making submissions before you, govern the process for writing speeches for government, members of parliament, and who does it, and so forth. Dr. Richards, you have described in answer to Mr. Wallace's questions the process by which 3 briefing notes on the 209 return, Fraser-Sockeye return, were developed, and you've described a September 30th, 09 workshop that DFO had. I'm not sure that you laid out what the purpose of that 209, that is September 30th, 209 workshop was. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, certainly, Mr. Commissioner. So I think that the purpose of that workshop was really to engage different staff who had interest within the science organization into trying to understand what happened in 2009 to the return. Obviously, when this event happened, the scientific staff were immensely interested in this. I mean, there was interested not only just from the event itself, but also from the, let's say, scientific interest in trying to understand what actually happened. So there was a lot of coffee table, hallway discussion about this, and that meeting was really an attempt to bring those groups together to have a more thorough, informed discussion about what happened and thinking about how we then might move forward, because we expected that we would be called on to help explain that, and we needed to make sure that we could prepare an informed answer to that question.
Now, this would be early days in terms of when you had first heard about, or it became evident that there was a poor Fraser-Sockeye return in 2009. Can you say when that piece of information would have come to light to science and to everyone else?
Well, I think, Mr. Commissioner, that what we would be doing is we would be following with great interest what happened through the Pacific Salmon Commission. During the summer, the Fraser panel of the Pacific Salmon Commission meets just about weekly, and they put out updated press reports out with the return and the expected return. So through particularly, I guess would be in particular through probably starting in July and into August, we would have been watching the forecasts, or the in-season forecast of the return change, and would have been really flagging it at that time.
Even before the September 30, 09 workshop, actually just before leaving that, was that a workshop attended by DFO scientists only, or other people as well?
No, that was really intended as an internal workshop. It was DFO staff only.
All right.
And really, this was an opportunity for us, as part of our normal process, to really talk with staff about what was going on here. Clearly, there were a lot of other groups that were also interested, but this was we wanted to have an internal discussion and talk with staff first, as we would normally do.
Even before the September 30, 09 workshop, was there an occasion when the minister attended in Vancouver to meet with people interested in the sockeye situation?
Yes, Mr. Commissioner, the minister did come into Vancouver in September and did hold a roundtable with stakeholders at that time. I was invited to participate in that meeting, and I was asked to make a short presentation to that meeting on the return. I think at that time there were a couple of things that were in play. One was trying to explain why there was a lot of question about why our forecast was bad, what happened to our forecast. So that was a lot of the initial focus and thinking about trying to explain why we cannot do a very good job on forecasting. And secondly, a lot of what was happening at that meeting also was trying to inform the minister about the next steps in the process, which eventually led to this commission. But we didn't know, there were different options that were being discussed, and one of them was a scientific process as opposed to a formal commission. And at that time, the minister was really trying to seek views of stakeholders on what process to follow.
Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you recall when Minister Shea was appointed Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, approximately?
I'm sure you have that information.
No, I don't actually.
I
It's
can't recall
obviously before
precisely.
September of 09, but that's fine. Do you know it to be the case that Minister Shea has been the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans continuously from at least September 09, and before that, whenever she was appointed, right through to the present and continuing?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, you have a binder there of some documents, Dr. Richards. If you turn to tabs 1, 2, and 3, you will see some documents that relate to a roundtable that was happening on September 11, 2009. Is that the meeting that you were describing that the minister was present at in Vancouver?
Yes, that is correct.
Is the document at tab 1 the presentation that you were referring to a moment ago?
Yes, that's correct. I was asked to make that summary presentation at the meeting.
All right. May that be the next exhibit, please? The document at tab 1, which is update on 2009 Fraser Sockeye context, forecasts, and returns, September 11, 2009.
632.
This document says September 11, 2009. Do you recall whether that was the date that the minister met with the people you've described?
Yes, that was the date.
If you turn to tab 2, you'll see a media lines document underneath some email headers. What's that? Do you recognize that, and what's that?
I guess I would not have, I recognize this as a standard kind of media line package. I probably would not have had a specific input into this document. But it is our
This is
standard protocol.
This appears to be a document relating to the meeting that the minister had with people in Vancouver,
Yes.
is it?
Yes.
Do you know whether this would be prepared before or after the meeting? I guess from the first sentence we can see it's probably after.
I would expect that it would be prepared. I mean, it could have been started, and they may have started prepping it prior to the meeting when they, based on anticipated, but it would have to be verified or completed after the meeting because it would need to explain what actually happened at that meeting.
May this be the next exhibit, please?
633.
You'll see at the top of tab 2, now exhibit 633, that this is, the media lines are underneath an email from Terry Davis, and we've seen his name in a document that Mr. Wallace took you to earlier, same document that had Mr. Robbins, Tom Robbins in it, who you identified. Can you identify who's Terry Davis?
Yes, Terry Davis is the Regional Director of Communications in Pacific Region, Fisheries and Oceans.
If you turn to tab 3, you'll see a summary of Minister Shea's Pacific Region visit, September 11, 2009, it's called. Have you seen that document before, and can you identify it as a document summarizing the meeting that you described Minister Shea had in Vancouver?
I can't recall whether I was actually party to this document, but it does seem to accurately reflect what happened at that event.
If you turn to page 3 of that document, you'll see a list of people there. If you take a second or so to look over it, can you identify whether that is a record of the people from various organizations that attended with Minister Shea?
That does match my recollection of that meeting. It does not include on this list the DFO members who were present at that meeting or the minister staff who were present.
All right. And if you turn back then to the first page of that same document, you'll see about a third down a list of DFO people. Is that the DFO people who attended? Well, is that others who attended? All of them may not be DFO.
Yes, yes, I believe that's correct.
Okay, and that includes you, of course. You
Yes.
see your name there. It also says in the list, though, Minister G. Lunn. Is that Gary Lunn?
Yes.
So that's a minister of another department, is it?
Yes.
Or is he? And he was there as well, was he?
He was certainly, I know that he was there in the beginning. I can't recall whether he was actually there for the entire meeting.
In addition to what you've said in answering Mr. Wallace's questions and what you've said just now in answering my questions, what other work did science undertake to try and understand and see what the scientific foundation or explanation or reasons for the 2009 stock or poor returns was? What else was done? What else is going on?
Well, in fact, there's quite a bit that is actually happening, and I hope that there'll be an opportunity that will come out as we proceed with the hearings over the summer. But in particular, there certainly was more work done focused on what we thought were the main hypotheses. So we did ask staff to do more work, to do follow-up. In particular, I'm sure you'll hear about the work of Dr. Richard Beamish in terms of the Strait of Georgia. Dr. Mark Trudell was really focused on what was happening in Queen Charlotte Sound. We were working on the broader fish health aspects as well as the disease aspects that you'll hear about with Dr. Stuart Johnson, Simon Jones, Christy Miller. So those pieces, that's probably some of the major pieces were ongoing. Each of those individuals would have been working with collaborators. We have had some subsequent meetings to try to review progress and keep updated. We set up an internal wiki-type site where we could keep people informed as to the progress on different pieces of the scientific research. There were subsequent meetings. There was the, after that September meeting that we discussed earlier, there's certainly the next major event after that would have been the Pacific Salmon Commission workshop that happened. But then following that, we certainly have continued to meet. I did meet with staff in January of this year to get an update on the progress on specific items, in particular, at that time, a particular focus on the work that was happening within the Strait of Georgia. We have another meeting, internal meeting with staff planned for next month to again have another update on the briefing, update on different aspects of what's going on in terms of the research. There will be some more work that will be done in conjunction with the Pacific Salmon Commission as a follow-up to that report, and I mentioned that earlier. So really, there is a very large amount of work, and some of this is ongoing. The story is evolving as we get more information and or try to follow up on certain leads.
For the most part, and recognizing that people come and go, are the scientists that were doing this work starting and even before September or so of 2009 still with DFO in the science branch here in Pacific Region?
Yes, yes, they are.
So there's a fair continuity of scientists
Yes.
working on this,
Yes,
isn't
and
there?
I have to say that even when scientists retire, they still tend to continue doing their work because really, say from a scientific perspective and from the perspective of these individuals' careers, scientifically speaking, this is a tremendously exciting and challenging question. And so they are very much engaged in trying to move forward and get some answers.
Just on that, I understand that what you're referring to is a program, formal or informal. It's called the Emeritus Program within DFO Science, isn't it?
Yes.
And can you just briefly, in a sentence or two, explain that?
Well, certainly. I think once scientists retire, we realize that they just don't stop working, or some do, but that's quite rare. So we do have a program called the Emeritus Program where they can still have access to some of the DFO facilities, libraries, email, to continue and potentially write up some of the work that they were doing during their career. They're also very active in mentoring some of our other staff. So this is really very much a win-win situation for us and for them as they ease into a retirement.
Or trying to understand and analyze the return that happened in 2009. Are these mainly senior scientists or junior scientists or what?
Well, in fairness, I think we have got scientists and others throughout the organization that are very much engaged in this, but and they are at different stages of their career working on some of these different pieces. So we do have a bit of a spectrum depending on areas of expertise. So work follows within areas of expertise, but in general, the leaders are the more experienced.
You've spoken to some of what I'm about to answer, but am I correct that answers to the science questions that relate to the stock returns are not easy to come by?
Yes, I think if we had some easy answers, we would not be in this inquiry. But in general, as normal, when you start to delve into certain kinds of questions or start to get some information, it just raises more questions. So this work really is ongoing.
And relative to that, is it the case that when answers start to emerge, they are often not firm, but rather soft in terms of how
Yes.
sure you are of the answer?
Oh, that's very much. I think the situation is, the normal scientific process goes on by really effectively some kind of speculation about what could be happening, and then you try to gather evidence to try to sort out your degree of certainty or belief in that information, and some things go by the wayside and other things are pursued. But often there will be some key pieces of information which change your thinking on something. But very much the situation is evolving as we get more information coming in.
Am I also correct that analyzing a problem that emerges in terms of the science analysis and finding answers often takes considerable time?
That's very much correct. I mean, these are complicated issues, and as I said, unfortunately, it's not simple, and it's likely to be a confounding of several factors that are involved, and so it really does take time to assemble, try to collect more information. Often in these situations, you wish you had some data that just simply don't exist. So you try to do the best you can to look at surrogates for some of that information, and to some extent other information becomes apparent later that wasn't available in the beginning.
Now, you've spoken of the Pacific Salmon Commission Forum in June of 2010 already. Can you elaborate on that? Firstly, was that hosted by the Pacific Salmon Commission?
It was hosted by the Pacific Salmon Commission, and the Pacific Salmon Commission, as you know, is an intergovernmental organization between Canada and the United States. So it was really co-funded by both parties.
And it was focused on Fraser sockeye, was it?
It was focused on trying to understand what happened in 2009. and to try to pull together the best advice we had based on the work that not only DFO was doing, but also based on information that was available from other scientists who were collecting data and information around that question.
Was it scientists who attended this forum?
There were scientists who were presenters at that forum. There was also some observers or other participants who were not scientists. I believe some of council was present at that meeting, and there were also some members of the fishing industry and First Nation representatives who also attended. So it was open, I believe, to some members of the Fraser panel, which includes a fairly broad group, as you would have heard.
Was it over 2 days or so?
Yes, it was.
Did you attend?
I did attend the meeting.
And without going through a list of names, can you say what sort of organizations or entities sent people to this forum?
Well, what we tried to do, because it was in part balanced in between Canada and the United States, we tried to make sure that we had a broad representation of U.S. interests as well as Canadian interests. So in addition to the members of DFO, we also had members from university. Alexander Morton was invited and was there. So it was a fairly broad spectrum of people who we thought might have information to contribute to this topic.
Thank you. So this would include government, NGOs, other governmental agencies besides fisheries, would it?
Yes, that's correct.
Did it include First Nation representatives, do you know?
I believe that there were some, as I recall, that there were certainly First Nation participants who were a part of the Fraser panel, so they did observe, but there were no presentations that were from First Nations.
Now, I understand, and you've, I think, referred to this, that a report resulted from that forum.
That's correct.
And that's a report that came out in the end of August of 2009?
Yes.
That's Exhibit 73.
Thank you. Is there a core group within DFO of scientists who are working on analyzing what happened in 2009 and trying to come up with some answers from a science perspective?
Yeah, I would say yes, there is a core group who are involved in this, and that would be specifically the individuals who were already engaged in research on salmon in and around the Strait of Georgia, and particularly on sockeye salmon. We've also pulled in some others who were not so engaged directly, some of the experts, for example, in marine mammals, because certainly that piece of the questions come up.
And are those the scientists, that core group that will be at a meeting that you were indicating you're going to have internally in the next short while?
That is certainly the intent. You know, it will be an internal meeting, again, in part for me to understand how things are evolved, because I need to find out from my staff what their thinking is, and they need a chance to talk to each other about some of these issues.
And you in turn, will they be the ones that will participate in a further Salmon Commission forum that you indicated is being planned at least for sometime later this year?
I am not sure exactly where we are in terms of the preparation for this future meeting and who will be invited to that. Certainly some of them will, whether they all will or not. Normally at these kinds of international events we have a restricted ability for invitations, and so we would not have everyone. We would have perhaps a representative group attend.
How is the very high return that we saw for Fraser sockeye in 2010 being worked into the work on the 209 low returns, if it is being worked in?
Well, clearly there's as much scientific interest in what happened in 2009. There is similarly scientific interest in what happened in 2010. And what we would like to have is make sure that if we have an explanation for what happened in 2009, that it would be consistent with what happened in 2010. So
if the June of 2010 Pacific Salmon Commission Forum was on the 209 low returns, do you envisage that the 2011 forum, whenever it happens this year, will be looking at both the 209 low return and the 2010 high return?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I'm not explicitly involved in the organization of that meeting, but I assume that that would be a topic of interest.
then moving even further beyond that, is the work that's being done now, currently underway, that you've described, to do with the 209 and the 2010 as well, is it tied into or relate back to the overall decline in productivity that has been observed in varying ways or varying degrees from sometime in the 1990s forward?
Well, as you will have seen from the Pacific Salmon Commission report from the June workshop, that workshop was interested in the longer-term decline as well as what happened in 2009. And I think the concern was we're looking for consistency. We want to have a series of hypotheses and explanations that sort of fit the overall picture as well as fit the specific events to the extent that's possible. So I would anticipate that would continue to be a focus. Obviously, there has been some concern about the overall long-term decline, and we need to understand that piece as well.
All right, thank you. Now, Mr. Wallace took you to tab 2 of the Commission's binder, which has that's the one that's got a lot of documents in it, and you identified that as the material for the meeting that you had in September 30th of 2009. I'm not going to ask you to look at all of the material at tab 2, but you're generally familiar with it, are you?
Yeah, yes.
And can you say whether more is known now on the science topics that are covered in this material than was known then?
Absolutely, there's more known. I mean, this was work, you have to appreciate, that was pulled together as very preliminary and probably on short notice. We didn't know a lot at that time. We hadn't had much, and it was just said, science takes place over extended period to develop on some of this. And so I think some of the work that would have been presented here would be contradictory to and different from stories that you will hear later as we get more information and the thinking on this scientifically evolves.
And then it tends to follow, but let me ask you whether some of the content of the material in tab 2, which is now an exhibit, will be outdated.
Yes, absolutely. It will be outdated.
And that's the beauty of science in part, is it?
Exactly. That's the way science operates, is we tend to put things out and then those are challenged and there's more information that comes in and things change. Particularly when you're looking at a topic like this, because it's something we've never seen before. So we're at the forefront of our thinking, and that thinking, the longer term thinking tends to be a little bit different from the short term thinking.
And if you like, one of the hearts, and there may be more than one heart, but one of the hearts of science is it's a constant learning exercise.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, another document that Mr. Wallace took you to is what's now called Exhibit 616B, and that's the disease briefing note. And the easiest place to find it, I think, is in tab 5 of Mr. Wallace's material. And the disease briefing note is the last of the documents in that tab. On page 3 of that note, which is almost at the end of the tab, there is a bullet under analysis, and I think we've got what we need. Thank you, Mr. Lunn. The fourth bullet, which begins other causes than a virus, have been considered. And then it says several different parasites are known to infect adult sockeye salmon as they migrate up the Fraser River. And then it goes on. Are you aware of a parasite that's in brackish water at the mouth of the Fraser River?
Yes, I am. Certainly we had been concerned about this, and I believe when Dr. Hinch was here, he may have referenced some of this work. We had been very interested in what was going on with the late run group of sockeye and the high mortality that they were experiencing with their early entry into the river. and that mortality seems to have been exacerbated by presence of a parasite. And so there was quite a bit of an interest over time within the last decade on some of this work, because it seemed to be at least related to mortality, or at least related to the whether it was actually the cause of mortality or not, that wasn't so clear, but it was at least the fish that were found on the spawning ground did seem to have this particular disease factor.
Can you say what is brackish water?
I think brackish water, it would be a water, I'm not sure I can give you a precisely correct oceanographic definition, but it would be a water which has
a layman's definition.
A layman's definition would be one where there is in between marine salinity and fresh water of sort of zero salinity. So it would have some low level of salinity.
All right. And obviously that's typically found at the mouths of rivers?
Right, right.
Now, Mr. Wallace asked you some questions that, amongst other things, led you to say that the role of science is to provide factual information, and that's what we do, as I heard you. In addition, is it also the case that science as a branch provides advice to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, scientific advice, that is?
Yes, absolutely. We provide scientific advice, but that scientific advice needs to be grounded in research and into factual evidence.
And that advice, in turn, and the facts that you've learned comes from research of various sorts.
Yes. Maybe if I could just clarify that too. The scientific advice is only one piece of the advice that goes into the department. So it may or may not impact on any final decision that's taken in any particular situation. But our role is to provide the scientific piece of the story, which is then combined with other factors that would then influence the final decision.
All right. I'd like to take you back, if I might, for a moment to the document that's at tab 3, which is now becoming an exhibit. Tab 3 of the Canada list of documents. That's the summary of 9 meeting the minister had with people in Vancouver. And you'll see on the first page, I'm going to call it the third bullet, but I suppose properly it's the first sub-bullet under the second bullet. It begins requests for a science forum.
Yes.
Is that one of the genesis or drivers that ultimately led to the June 2010 Pacific Salmon Forum?
No. Perhaps I could clarify what was going on here. As I think I mentioned, the context of this meeting was before any decision was made on this particular commission, and there certainly was some thinking about different options that were being considered at that time. Should we have this kind of inquiry, or should we do some other kind of process? So I think the Science Forum was an alternative process that was being proposed rather than going forward with a commission. And there were various other kinds of options in between that were also being proposed.
Is my time up?
No, by my calculation, though, you have 9 minutes.
Thank you. Would I be correct that it's by no means an everyday occurrence that the minister comes out to Vancouver and meets with a group of stakeholders and fisheries officials?
I mean, ministers do tend to come out, on a fairly regular basis, probably a couple times a year, and meet with various stakeholders.
All right. Still within this document at tab 3, which let's say has an exhibit number now, and I apologize, I don't know it.
That's 633.
Exhibit 633. On the second page,
Apparently it's 634.
Oh, pardon me.
or 634 is the exhibit number. You'll see on the second page, about halfway down the text, there's a bullet that begins many participants, etc. It's the second last bullet there.
Yes.
And it says in the last part of that bullet, DFO staff were acknowledged for their efforts to conserve and protect salmon. Is it your memory that at that meeting, the participants there gave high support for conserving and protecting salmon?
I think most of the stakeholders believe that we do need to conserve and protect salmon. I can't recall the explicit, but I do recall some very passionate discussions around that topic at the meeting.
All right. Do you recall whether biodiversity or conservation units or stocks and the importance of different stocks was discussed?
I think, again, the stakeholders who were there probably spoke to their specific area of interest. In particular, as I recall, some of the First Nations participants, spoke to their specific areas. So in that context, yes, but perhaps not with those kinds of words.
Turning to the preparation of speeches for a possible debate in the House of Commons that Mr. Wallace was asking you about. First, let me ask, do you know whether a debate ever occurred in the House of Commons on Pacific salmon in 2009?
I believe that it did not occur.
And you've testified what you and some others within the Pacific region of Fisheries did and were asked to do. Was this an exercise that was being led and driven from the department in Ottawa?
It probably was. I mean, we get it down through the region, so I'm not necessarily always aware of the background that's happening at the Ottawa level on this kind of topic.
All right, and you may not have an answer to this question yet based on what you've just said, but do you have any knowledge as to what unit or part of Fisheries was spearheading this?
I probably should, but I know that's not my area.
Okay, that's fine. And you've given evidence about this, and just to underline what may be the obvious, this was a highly unusual request that was being made of Science Branch, I take it.
Yes.
And you've spoken to this, but again, to underline things, is this something that you had not been engaged in before?
Well, we have certainly been engaged in certain areas. For example, in doing notes for a question period. If there's some kind of question, we would be engaged in writing that kind of material. But it would be simply factual. This is what we know.
Right. But in terms of speech writing?
But in terms of speech writing, at least my interpretation of a speech was that it would be include information that was not necessarily factual. It may include the feelings of the individual. And certainly we could not prepare that kind of information. We were certainly able to input into the factual material.
And you as a scientist or in Science Branch had not been asked to participate in that kind of exercise before?
That's correct.
Or since?
Correct.
You mentioned question period notes. Can probably almost ask the Commissioner to take judicial notice of what question period is. But again, to be clear, that's a period in the House of Commons, or do you know whether that's a period in the House of Commons when people can ask various government ministers whatever question they decide to ask?
I believe that's the way our parliamentary system works.
And question period notes are factual information that's prepared by staff on a particular topic that they know something about that
Yes.
then is inputted to the system, isn't it?
Well, I think if there's an expectation that the member may be asked a question on a specific topic, or the minister might be, and we have background on that, we are asked to pull together the information that we have and our factual information on that note. But it is strictly factual.
All right, thank you. I believe I've met my time.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. McDade, I have as the next counsel.
It's Gregory McDade for Dr. Morton and the Aquaculture Coalition. Good morning, Dr. Richards. Can I ask, let's turn to the Commission. Let's start with the Commission documentation. As I understand it, the September 30, 2009 meeting was really the genesis or the basis of the information that was ultimately included in the briefing note on factors.
Yes, that's what we've just,
And the September 30th, 2009 meeting was an internal meeting for DFO scientists who you felt were particularly knowledgeable on the subject.
well, it was for scientists who were particularly knowledgeable, plus some others who were interested. We did try to bring a fairly broad group of people. In fact, there was quite a lot of interest in that particular, obviously, there was interest in that subject.
So it was really your best minds on the subject, or at least that was your attempt.
Our attempt was to bring our best minds and, well, tempered to some extent by availability of staff.
And as you started, you're not a particular expert in these subjects. You relied on these people to give you your advice.
Well, these were the people who were out in the field, who were there on the ground, who were engaged in the research, who were working to pull that information together.
So I want to take you to Exhibit 613G. One of the presentations there by Dr. Miller. You're familiar with this presentation?
I'm familiar with the presentation, and I will say, just for clarity, that I was not present in the audience when this work was presented.
Yes, but presumably the rest of your best minds were there when it was presented.
I hope so.
And it formed the basis of your thinking as you and Mr. Saunders prepared the briefing note.
It was part of that, yes.
All right. And so I'm really just trying to get what you knew and when you knew it in terms of DFO science. If I could turn to page 4. You understood at that point that, at least in September of 2009, that Dr. Miller was targeting a retrovirus?
Well, that was certainly one hypothesis. I mean, at that time, and there was no virus that was identified.
All right, but that your best scientist on this was identifying a retrovirus?
Well, she was suggesting it was a retrovirus. I'm not sure that, that was her view on this at that time.
Right, and you, as you said, have to bow to her expertise.
Yes, and in this particular area, we also had other experts in fish health, and there was not necessarily always full agreement between all the experts, and particularly what was going on here.
There was nobody at that meeting who disagreed, was there?
I can't answer that question because I was not in the audience at that time.
All right, fine. Can I go to page 9? You see the reference to unprecedented levels of mortality in 2008? Do you see that?
Yes.
And the reference below that is to the 2009 sockeye not showing up, which is the purpose of this commission. And the suggestion that the 20% decline in tumors could account for 0.9 million fish going missing in the Strait of Georgia, right?
That's what that says, although I think we have to be a little careful in doing an interpretation of this kind of presentation because we don't have all the full context and the facts stated here.
True, but in terms of what DFO science knew, this was the best information you had in September.
Well, this
2009.
was her interpretation at that time. I mean, this is very much has been a work in progress, and I think we need to be really clear that the work that she's been doing here has really been on the forefront. And when you're on the forefront, you don't always have all. It isn't fully worked out, and this particular area is something. This area has been one which has been quite evolving in the thinking.
Yes, I'm just going to what, in the evolution, September 30th, 2009, this was the thinking of your top scientist on this matter.
That was her thinking at that time.
Right. And that she noted that in 2005, which was the brood year for the 2009, that 75% of the adults were positive for that viral signature. Right?
That's what this, yes, you're reading the document, yes.
And
that's what.
Well, I'll go in a few minutes to what you did with this material, but I just wanted to know what material you had to work with. If I could go to page 11. The heading of that page is Strong Linkages of Genomic and Brain Tumor Data with Plasmatoid Leukemia Caused by the Salmon Leukemia Virus. That was the hypothesis of your best scientist on this matter?
That was her hypothesis. I'm not, as I said, there was some other points of view amongst some of our other experts on fish health on this, and I'm not fully aware of the debate that took place at that particular event because I wasn't there.
What other experts in your fish health field would you have consulted about this, if any?
Well, we have a group of staff whose expertise is fish health. That group of people are currently led by Stuart Johnson. We also have on staff Carl Garver, who is an expert in virology, the study of viruses.
Well, did either of those people disagree with Dr. Miller? To your knowledge?
I'm not quite sure. I know that there were some concerns about going too far on speculation at this time, but I'm not fully, let's say, I'm having trouble remembering the full sequence of details. I think what we want to do is just to try to be, careful. Some of this was really on speculation, and what we're really trying to do is ground this in fact, and the scientific process really does evolve by challenge, and then trying to get more information to confirm or reject certain points of view.
But in this period of September 30th and shortly thereafter, when you were drafting the briefing note, I'm just asking for your evidence as to whether you recall consulting any specific other scientists who would have disagreed with this conclusion.
Certainly in the preparation of that briefing note, we did engage others, including Stuart Johnson, to make sure that we were representative. As I said, my task is to try to get people together and to agree as much as possible on what was being presented. And this is in one area where the thinking was or has evolved.
But you don't specifically recall today speaking to Dr. Johnson and having him tell you he disagreed with this conclusion.
Well, I know that there were some more general, he had some other points of view. I can't recall explicitly what those were in the context of this particular slide that you have up here now.
All right, well, I'll come to the subsequent documents in a few minutes. But the name of the virus that was being purported at that point was the salmon leukemia virus, right?
That certainly was a hypothesis that she was putting forward.
This is also called, you see at the third bullet, it's also called marine anemia.
Yes.
That's the name for it when it's in fish farms, right?
I am not the expert on diseases, so I'm sure you'll have more testimony on that later, I would expect.
Well, when you were preparing the briefing note, did you know that?
Well, I think what I was doing was relying on those experts to help prepare that note, and I was clarifying them that we did have that technically correct.
All right, can we go to page 14? The heading on page 14 refers to if SLV, that salmon leukemia virus, is a primary factor in the salmon declines in BC. So there was at least speculation by Dr. Miller that the salmon leukemia virus was a primary factor in the salmon declines.
That was her speculation at the time, as I recall.
Yes. Now, under the heading potential for mitigation, you'll see that she refers to the possibility that if one takes action, you could minimize the vertical transmission. What do you as a scientist understand the word vertical transmission to mean in the salmon field?
I really think that that level of discussion would be better placed with our disease experts at the time we have that testimony.
Do you not know what vertical transmission even means?
I'm not I have a general sense of that, but I'm not going to give you a specific definition. I think that really needs to be done with the experts.
Well, Dr. Richards, I'm not looking for a highly technical definition here, I'm looking for your understanding of what that means.
Well, we are talking, look, I'm just, sorry, my brain has gone fuzzy on that particular point right now, so I would rather not give you an answer that's wrong.
Well, doesn't it simply mean that you can transmit from the parent stock through the eggs to the next generation?
I think that's what it is, but I would like to, as I said, this is not my area, and I just want to be very careful to not give incorrect evidence.
Well, when you were preparing the briefing note, would you have consulted someone to get a definition of that other than Dr. Miller?
As I mentioned already, that there were multiple individuals who were involved in preparing that note, and in particular, I would have also had some discussions with our experts on fish health that I would have relied on and in between the two to make sure everything was technically correct.
Well, wouldn't it be important to at least understand what that concept means?
Well, I'm sure I did at the time. You're asking me today.
I see.
Hearing is now adjourned until 2 p.m.